I'm a pediatric surgeon at Rainbow Children's Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, or at least I was, until I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago. You can call me Dr. Sarah Martinez if you want. During my 21 years there, I've performed over 200 surgeries on children, correcting complex congenital heart defects, removing aggressive pediatric tumors, repairing devastating trauma injuries from car accidents and falls, reconstructing birth defects that threatened to steal a child's future before they'd even had a chance to dream, and operating on cases where a child's entire life hung by the thinnest thread imaginable. I thought I had seen every miracle and tragedy that pediatric medicine could offer. I've held the beating hearts of newborn babies in my palms while reconstructing their cardiac chambers, watching those tiny hearts continue to pump life through vessels no thicker than angel hair pasta. I've removed tumors the size of grapefruits from the abdomens of toddlers who giggled and asked for ice cream just hours after surgery. I've worked through Christmas nights, New Year's mornings, and countless family birthdays, missing my own children's school plays and soccer games to save other people's children whose parents waited in agony outside operating room doors, clutching coffee cups and prayer books, hoping against hope for just one more day, one more birthday, one more bedtime story with their little ones. In pediatric surgery, you learn quickly that children are both the most fragile and the most resilient patients you'll ever encounter. Their small bodies can be devastated by injuries that adults might survive, but they can also heal from trauma that would permanently disable a grown person. I've seen 3-year-olds bounce back from major organ reconstruction surgery and be running around the playground within weeks, while I've also seen teenagers succumb to complications from relatively minor procedures because their developing bodies couldn't handle the physiological stress. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about the human body, about healing, about death itself, and about what's medically possible in this universe we inhabit. It's the case of an 8-year-old girl named Sarah Blackwell, and what happened in Operating Room 5 on November 8, 2019, shouldn't have been possible according to every principle of surgery, human physiology, cellular biology, and medical science that I'd studied at Harvard Medical School, practiced during my residency at Boston Children's Hospital, perfected during my fellowship at Cincinnati Children's, and applied during more than 2 decades of pediatric surgical practice. What I witnessed that day didn't just defy medical explanation, it obliterated the very foundations of what we understand about life and death, about the absolute limits of human healing, about cellular regeneration, about the boundaries between possible and impossible, and about the profound mysteries that still exist within the human body that we medical professionals claim to understand so comprehensively. It was so impossible, so far beyond anything documented in peer-reviewed medical literature, taught in any medical school curriculum, or discussed at any surgical conference I'd ever attended, that it ultimately led me to leave pediatric surgery entirely and spend sleepless nights questioning whether everything I thought I knew about medicine, biology, and the nature of human life was merely scratching the surface of a much deeper, more mysterious truth about existence itself. Because once you've seen the medically impossible happen with your own eyes, once you've witnessed something that challenges not just your professional expertise, but the very core principles of scientific medicine, how do you go back to practicing surgery based on what you thought were unchangeable, immutable laws of biology, physics, and cellular function? How do you continue making life and death decisions based on medical textbooks when you've seen those textbooks proven catastrophically wrong? Let me tell you about Rainbow Children's Hospital first, because understanding the setting, the level of medical expertise available, and the sophisticated technology at our disposal is absolutely crucial to understanding why what happened to Zara was so unprecedented, so impossible, and so fundamentally challenging to everything we thought we knew about pediatric medicine. Rainbow Children's Hospital is one of the premier pediatric medical centers in the southwestern United States, a 400-bed facility serving children from Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of California, Colorado, and northern Mexico. We're not just a regional hospital treating routine pediatric cases, we're a destination medical center, a place where families travel thousands of miles to bring their children when other hospitals, other doctors, other medical teams have exhausted their options and delivered the devastating news that nothing more can be done. Our pediatric surgery department is consistently ranked among the top 5 in the nation by US News and World Report, and for good reason. We handle the most complex, challenging, and seemingly impossible cases that pediatric medicine encounters. Conjoined twin separations that require months of planning and surgical teams of 20 specialists working in perfect coordination. In utero fetal surgeries performed on babies still in their mother's wombs, correcting life-threatening defects before birth. Pediatric organ transplants involving hearts, livers, and kidneys, so small they could fit in the palm of your hand. Reconstructive procedures so intricate and delicate that they require microscopic precision and surgical techniques that push the absolute boundaries of what human hands can accomplish. The technology available to us represents the cutting edge of medical science, but we have robotic surgical systems worth over $8 million that can perform procedures with precision measured in fractions of millimeters. Our imaging equipment can show real-time blood flow in vessels thinner than human hair, can track the electrical activity of individual heart cells, and can create three-dimensional models of a child's internal anatomy that allow us to practice complex surgeries in virtual reality before ever touching the actual patient. Our monitoring systems are so sophisticated that they track every heartbeat, every breath, every fluctuation in blood pressure, every change in brainwave activity, every shift in blood chemistry, and every alteration in organ function of our tiny patients. We can detect problems before they become life-threatening, we can predict complications before they manifest clinically, and we can intervene with surgical precision that would have been considered science fiction just 2 decades ago. The surgical suites themselves are marvels of medical engineering. Operating Room 5, where Zara's surgery took place, is equipped with laminar airflow systems that create completely sterile environments, surgical lights that can illuminate tissue with the intensity and precision of microscopic examination, and communication systems that allow our surgical teams to coordinate with specialists around the world during complex procedures. I didn't arrive at Rainbow Children's as a rookie surgeon, learning the basics of pediatric care. My path to becoming one of the country's leading pediatric surgeons began during my undergraduate years at Stanford University, where I majored in biochemistry with a focus on cellular regeneration and tissue repair mechanisms. I graduated summa cum laude and was accepted into Harvard Medical School, where I spent 4 years studying not just surgical techniques, but the fundamental biological processes that govern how the human body heals, adapts, and responds to medical intervention. During medical school, I became fascinated by pediatric medicine because children's bodies represent the pinnacle of human healing potential. Unlike adults, whose cellular repair mechanisms have slowed with age, children possess remarkable regenerative capabilities that allow them to recover from injuries and surgeries with speed and completeness that often amazes even experienced medical professionals. After graduating from Harvard, I completed my general surgery residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most demanding and prestigious surgical training programs in the country. During those 5 years, I performed over 200 surgeries under the supervision of some of the world's most skilled surgeons, learning not just the technical aspects of surgical procedures, but the critical thinking, decision-making, and crisis management skills that separate competent surgeons from exceptional ones. But general surgery, even at the highest level, didn't satisfy my desire to make the most meaningful possible impact on human life. I wanted to work with patients who had decades of potential life ahead of them, who could benefit from surgical intervention, not just for a few years but for entire lifetimes of possibility. That's why I applied for and was accepted into the Pediatric Surgery Fellowship at Boston Children's Hospital, widely considered the most competitive and comprehensive pediatric surgical training program in the world. The fellowship was 3 years of the most intensive medical training imaginable. I worked 18-hour days, took call every third night, and performed surgeries on children ranging from premature newborns weighing less than 2 pounds to teenagers with complex medical conditions that required surgical solutions no adult surgeon would ever encounter. I learned to operate with the delicacy required for babies whose entire cardiovascular systems could fit in a teacup, and I developed the mental fortitude necessary to remain calm and precise when a child's life depended on surgical decisions made in seconds under enormous pressure. During my fellowship, I was privileged to work with Dr. Margaret Chen, one of the pioneering figures in pediatric cardiac surgery, who taught me that successful pediatric surgery requires not just technical skill but an almost supernatural level of patience, precision, and emotional resilience. When you operate on a child, Dr. Chen told me during my second year of fellowship, you're not just repairing their body, you're protecting their future, their dreams, their potential to experience all the joys and challenges that life offers. Every incision you make, every suture you place, every decision you make in that operating room will affect not just their child but their parents, their siblings, their future families, and potentially generations of people who will exist because you gave that child the chance to grow up and live. By the time I completed my fellowship and joined the surgical team at Rainbow Children's Hospital in 2001, I had already performed over 800 pediatric surgeries and had been published in the Journal of Pediatric Surgery, Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery, and the American Journal of Pediatric Medicine, a combined total of 9 times on topics ranging from innovative surgical techniques for congenital heart defects to post-operative care protocols that improved healing outcomes for children recovering from major abdominal surgery. I joined Rainbow Children's because they offered me the opportunity to practice the kind of pediatric surgery that I was most passionate about, taking on the cases that other hospitals and other surgeons considered impossible, not just routine pediatric procedures, but the children whose conditions were so complex, so rare, or so severe that other medical centers had suggested palliative care rather than attempted surgical repair. During my first 5 years at Rainbow, I developed a reputation for accepting consultation requests that other pediatric surgeons had declined. Babies born with their hearts completely outside their chest walls, a condition called ectopia cordis that occurs in fewer than 1 in 100,000 births, and traditionally has a survival rate of less than 10%. Toddlers with massive tumors that had grown around their spinal cords, threatening paralysis if removed, but death if left untreated. Children whose internal organs had been displaced by traumatic injuries, so severe that other hospitals had suggested comfort care and family support rather than attempted surgical reconstruction. Hospital administrators began tracking my case acceptance rate and surgical outcomes because the numbers were unprecedented. While most pediatric surgeons, quite reasonably, focused on cases with high probability of successful outcomes, I was deliberately seeking out the children that everyone else had given up on. My success rate on these impossible cases was 73%, meaning that nearly 3/4 of the children other hospitals had told their families couldn't be saved were walking out of Rainbow Children's Hospital healthy, whole, and ready to live full lives. The medical staff started calling me Dr. Last Chance, though never to my face. Some colleagues thought I was being reckless, taking on cases that were likely to fail and potentially damaging the hospital's reputation and the parents' emotional well-being by offering false hope. But I had a different philosophy about pediatric medicine that had been shaped by my own childhood experience of watching my younger brother recover from a condition that doctors had initially said was untreatable. When I was 12 years old, my 6-year-old brother David was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that affected his kidney function and was expected to require lifelong dialysis and eventual organ transplant. But a pioneering pediatric surgeon at UCLA was willing to attempt an experimental procedure that had never been tried on someone David's age. The surgery was successful, and David grew up to become a healthy adult with completely normal kidney function. That experience taught me that the word impossible in medicine often just means not yet understood or not yet attempted with the right combination of skill, technology, and determination. So when families came to me carrying medical records stamped with phrases like inoperable, terminal, or incompatible with life, I saw children who deserved every possible chance to experience childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. I saw parents who deserved to know that every medical option had been explored before they faced the unthinkable decision of saying goodbye to their child. This philosophy drove me to develop new surgical techniques that were later adopted by pediatric hospitals worldwide. I published over 40 papers on innovative approaches to complex pediatric conditions, including a breakthrough technique for repairing certain types of congenital heart defects that reduced surgery time by 40% and improved long-term outcomes for children born with these conditions. I spoke at international conferences in London, Tokyo, Sydney, and Sao Paulo, sharing techniques that other surgeons could use to save children in their own hospitals. I trained surgical residents and fellows who went on to establish pediatric surgery programs at hospitals across the country. I served on medical boards that established protocols for pediatric trauma care, consulted with pharmaceutical companies developing medications specifically for children, and collaborated with biomedical engineers, designing surgical instruments scaled for pediatric use. But success in medicine, especially pediatric surgery, is always measured against a backdrop of the cases you lose, the children you couldn't save, the families you had to deliver devastating news to despite your best efforts, and all the advanced medical technology at your disposal. For every miraculous recovery, for every child who walked out of our hospital healthy when other doctors had said survival was impossible, there were other children whose conditions were simply beyond what medical science could repair, no matter how skilled the surgeon, how advanced the technology, or how determined the medical team. 8-year-old Marcus Williams, whose aggressive brain tumor had invaded so deeply into his brainstem that any surgical attempt to remove it would have left him in a permanent vegetative state, or killed him immediately. The tumor was growing rapidly, causing seizures and neurological deterioration, but the location made surgery impossible without destroying the brain tissue responsible for breathing, consciousness, and basic life functions. I spent weeks consulting with neurosurgeons, oncologists, and radiation specialists, searching for any possible approach that might give Marcus a chance, but sometimes, the biology of disease simply cannot be overcome by human intervention. 6-year-old Isabella Chen, born with a rare genetic condition called harlequin ichthyosis that caused her skin to form thick, diamond-shaped scales that cracked and bled constantly. Despite multiple surgeries to manage her condition, skin grafts that temporarily improved her quality of life, and experimental treatments that showed initial promise, Isabella's body simply couldn't maintain the basic barrier function that healthy skin provides. She died from overwhelming infections despite our round-the-clock efforts to support her immune system and prevent bacterial invasion through her compromised skin barrier. Newborn David Thompson, born at 24 weeks gestation with such severe developmental abnormalities that his heart, lungs, and digestive system had never properly formed. We kept him alive for 63 days, using the most advanced neonatal life support technology available, performing 7 separate surgeries to try to repair or reconstruct his vital organs. His parents, Jennifer and Michael Thompson, spent every day at his bedside, reading him stories, playing soft music, and talking to him about all the things they wanted to do together when he got better. But David's body simply couldn't sustain life outside the intensive technological support we were providing, and despite our desperate efforts, He passed away in his mother's arms on a quiet Sunday morning. These losses haunted me, as they haunt every pediatric surgeon who enters this field with dreams of saving every child, but learns quickly that medicine, no matter how advanced, has absolute limits. There are genetic conditions we cannot cure, developmental abnormalities we cannot repair, traumatic injuries so severe that no surgical skill can overcome them, and biological realities that no amount of human determination, technological sophistication, or medical expertise can change. The hardest part of pediatric surgery isn't the technical complexity of the procedures, though they often require surgical precision that pushes human capabilities to their absolute limits. The hardest part isn't the physical demands of standing in operating rooms for 12 to 16 hours performing surgeries that require microscopic accuracy and unwavering concentration. The hardest part is looking into the eyes of parents who have brought their child to you as their last hope, their final chance for a miracle, and explaining why their child's condition is beyond what current medical science can address, why the damage is irreparable, why the disease has progressed too far, or why the biological realities of their situation cannot be overcome by surgical intervention. I remember every one of those conversations, the way parents' faces change when they realize that you, the surgeon they've traveled hundreds or thousands of miles to see, the doctor other hospitals referred them to as their child's best chance for survival, are telling them the same thing they've heard from every other medical professional they've consulted, that their child's condition is incompatible with life, that further surgical intervention would only prolong suffering without offering meaningful hope for recovery, that it's time to focus on comfort care and making whatever time remains as peaceful and pain-free as possible. These are the conversations that wake you up at 3 in the morning, that make you question whether you should have tried a different approach, whether there was some surgical technique you hadn't considered, whether another surgeon might have been willing to attempt what you deemed impossible. They're the conversations that either break pediatric surgeons or forge them into professionals who understand both the incredible power and the absolute limitations of medical intervention. By 2019, after 18 years at Rainbow Children's Hospital, I thought I had developed a realistic, balanced understanding of both the possibilities and the limitations of pediatric surgery. I had witnessed medical miracles that defied statistical probability, children who recovered from conditions with survival rates in the single digits, surgical procedures that succeeded against odds that should have made success impossible, and healing processes that seemed to transcend medical predictions about recovery timelines and long-term outcomes. I had also encountered the absolute boundaries of what human medical intervention could accomplish. When tissue death exceeded certain thresholds, when blood loss reached levels incompatible with survival, when vital organs sustained damage that destroyed their basic functional capacity, when genetic conditions created developmental abnormalities that no surgical technique could correct. These were the biological realities that defined the limits of medical possibility, the lines that separated what could be fixed from what had to be accepted. I believed deeply in the power of surgical skill combined with advanced medical technology. I had faith in aggressive intervention when it was warranted, in pushing boundaries when children's lives hung in the balance, and in refusing to give up on cases where even a small chance of success justified the risks and efforts involved. But I also understood and accepted that there were biological laws that governed life and death, cellular function and organ viability, healing and deterioration, laws that no amount of human effort, technological sophistication, or medical determination could overcome. I had performed surgeries that lasted 18 hours, procedures so complex that they required 4 separate surgical teams working in carefully coordinated sequence, with some team members operating while others rested, ensuring that peak surgical precision could be maintained throughout procedures that pushed human endurance to its limits. I had operated on children whose conditions were so rare that there were fewer than 20 documented cases in worldwide medical literature, meaning that every surgical decision had to be made without the benefit of established protocols or previous experience to guide my choices. I had developed surgical techniques that other pediatric surgeons initially considered too risky or too innovative to attempt, but which proved successful and were eventually adopted as standard practice at children's hospitals across the country. I had collaborated with biomedical engineers to design surgical instruments specifically for pediatric use, tools that could perform procedures on blood vessels and organs so small that traditional surgical instruments were inadequate for the level of precision required. But throughout all of these experiences, all of these challenges to conventional medical wisdom, all of these pushes against the boundaries of what was considered surgically possible, I never encountered anything that truly violated the fundamental biological principles that govern life and death. Complex surgeries succeeded because of skill, preparation, and technological advancement. Children recovered from supposedly impossible conditions because their young bodies possessed healing capabilities that we had underestimated, not because biological laws had been suspended or violated. When children died despite our best efforts, it was because we had reached the absolute limits of what medical intervention could accomplish, not because something supernatural or scientifically impossible had occurred. Death, in my experience, was always the result of biological processes that we could understand, predict, and sometimes prevent, but never reverse once certain thresholds had been crossed. At least, that's what I believed with absolute certainty until November 8, 2019. The case that would shatter everything I thought I understood about medicine, about life and death, about the boundaries between possible and impossible, began long before I met Sarah Blackwell. It started on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning in the mountains of northern Arizona, about 215 miles from our hospital in Phoenix, in a place where medical miracles were the last thing anyone expected to encounter. Sarah was 8 years old, the daughter of Elena and James Blackwell, who owned and operated a small but successful ranch outside the town of Prescott Valley, a rural community nestled in the high desert mountains, where families still lived close to the land and children grew up understanding the cycles of life and death that govern both animals and the natural world around them. Elena Blackwell was a veterinary technician who had moved to Arizona from Colorado after marrying James, a third-generation rancher whose family had been raising cattle and horses in the Prescott Valley area since the 1940s. Their ranch, called Desert Wind Ranch, covered 340 acres of high desert terrain and supported a small herd of cattle, a dozen horses that they bred and trained for trail riding, and an assortment of chickens, goats, and farm dogs that Zara had named and treated as beloved pets. Zara was a typical third grader in most ways. She loved reading chapter books about adventure and mystery, collected interesting rocks and minerals that she found during hikes in the mountains surrounding their ranch, and had recently lost her first tooth, which had been carefully preserved under her pillow for the tooth fairy's visit. But she was also a ranch child, which meant she possessed an independence, confidence, and connection to animals that set her apart from most children her age. She could ride horses bareback across the desert trails, help her father repair fence lines and water systems, and assist her mother with veterinary care for their animals. Her parents described her as fearless, not reckless, but genuinely unafraid of challenges that might intimidate other children. She was the kind of child who would climb the tallest cottonwood tree in their yard to rescue a kitten, pet any dog she encountered, regardless of size or breed, and ask endless thoughtful questions about how everything in the world worked, from why horses needed shoes to how birds knew which direction to fly during migration. Zara had been homeschooled by her mother, who had been a teacher before moving to the ranch, and her education included not just traditional academic subjects but practical skills like animal husbandry, basic veterinary care, mechanical repair, and desert survival techniques that reflected the realities of ranch life in rural Arizona. On that Tuesday morning, November 5, 2019, Zara was playing in the main barn, while her father worked on repairing a hydraulic system that operated their hay lift, a piece of equipment essential for storing the large bales of hay that fed their livestock through the winter months. The barn was a large converted structure that housed both livestock and farm machinery, including several pieces of heavy equipment that James maintained and operated as part of their ranch operations. The hydraulic lift system was a powerful piece of machinery, capable of lifting hay bales weighing up to 1,200 pounds to the upper storage area of the barn. It operated using high-pressure hydraulic fluid and a system of cables, pulleys, and mechanical arms that could position heavy loads with remarkable precision. James had been having intermittent problems with the system for several weeks. Sometimes it would operate normally, but occasionally it would stick or fail to respond to the control switches, requiring manual adjustment and troubleshooting. Zara had been specifically instructed to stay away from the machinery area, while her father worked on the hydraulic system, both because of the obvious safety concerns and because James needed to concentrate on the complex repair work without worrying about his daughter's whereabouts. But children, even responsible children like Zara, sometimes forget such warnings when something interesting catches their attention, or when curiosity overcomes caution. What happened next was the kind of accident that transforms ordinary families into medical emergency statistics, that creates the trauma cases that pediatric surgeons train their entire careers to handle, and that demonstrates how quickly and completely life can change in a single moment of mechanical failure and tragic timing. While James was working underneath the hydraulic system, adjusting the pressure lines and testing the manual controls, Zara wandered into the machinery area, apparently fascinated by the complex mechanical systems that her father was repairing. According to James's later account to investigators, Zara had asked him several questions about how the hydraulic lift worked, and he had briefly explained the basic principles while continuing his repair work. What neither James nor Zara realized was that the hydraulic system had developed a dangerous malfunction in its safety mechanisms. The control switches that normally prevented accidental activation had been damaged during previous repair attempts, and the manual override system that should have made accidental operation impossible was not functioning properly due to a hidden leak in the hydraulic fluid lines. When Zara, curious about the mechanical systems her father was repairing, touched what she thought was an inactive control switch, the hydraulic lift system activated with full power and no safety protocols in place. The massive mechanical arm, carrying over 1,800 pounds of steel hay forks and lifting mechanisms, came crashing down with the force and speed that hydraulic systems generate when they malfunction catastrophically. The entire mechanical assembly struck Zara across her torso, abdomen, and legs with an impact force that engineering investigators later calculated at over 12,000 pounds per square inch, enough force to instantly crush most of the bones in her small body and cause immediate damage to every major organ system in her torso. James Blackwell's scream brought Elena running from the horse stalls. What they found was their 8-year-old daughter motionless beneath machinery that should have killed her instantly. But as I lifted that crushed, broken little girl onto my operating table 3 hours later, I had no idea I was about to witness something that would shatter every law of medicine I'd ever learned. What happened in operating room 5 that day defied every principle of surgery, biology, and human physiology. Zara's heart had stopped for over 18 minutes during transport. Her internal organs were completely destroyed. According to every medical textbook ever written, she should have been pronounced dead at the scene. But she wasn't dead. And what I witnessed during that 7-hour surgery, the way her tissue regenerated before my eyes, the way her heart restarted on its own, the way her body healed in real time during the operation, was medically impossible. That case taught me that medicine, for all its advances, still contains profound mysteries. Sometimes the impossible happens, and we're left humbled by forces we don't understand. Zara walked out of that hospital completely healed, and I walked away from surgery forever, knowing I'd witnessed a miracle that medical science will never be able to explain.